Yasmin stood barefoot on the packed earth floor, breath shaking, as she pressed her weight against the wooden door of her workshop. Someone outside pounded again, harder this time, the blows rattling the hinges like a warning. She had locked the door only a moment earlier, hands trembling so fiercely she nearly dropped the metal latch. Now she braced her palms against the wood, sweat collecting at her temples, despite the cool highland air drifting through the cracks. She wasn't ready. Not for more mockery. Not for more neighbors whispering her name with pity or laughter. Not after the day she'd had. Yasmin. A voice called from the other side, sharp, impatient, too familiar. Open. I know you're inside. Her heart squeezed. Ifrax. Loyal, stubborn Ifrax, who always seemed to show up when Yasmin was falling apart. For a moment, Yasmin squeezed her eyes shut and let her forehead rest against the door. She didn't want to be seen like this. Not with her dress half torn, not with the remnants of the palace's laughter echoing in her skull, not with her weaving tools scattered across the floor, as if some violent wind had torn through her life. But Ifrax wouldn't leave. She never did. Yasmin unlatched the door with numb fingers. It cracked open a few inches before Ifrax pushed her way inside without waiting for permission. Her friend froze mid-step. Yasmin followed her gaze. The workshop, the place she had loved since childhood, the room that had carried her mother's scent long after she died, looked ruined. Cotton thread was tangled across the floor. Fabric scraps lay in torn piles. The ceremonial guntiino she had worn earlier was bald near the hearth, singed where she had hovered it above the flames before fear stopped her hand. Ifrax closed the door behind her and turned with a look that held both fury and heartbreak. What did they do to you? Her voice was low, almost a growl. Yasmin swallowed hard words, fighting to escape, but catching against the pain swelling in her throat. She brushed her hands over her face, wiping away tears she didn't remember shedding. It doesn't matter, she whispered. It does, Ifrax shot back. You're shaking. Your whole workshop looks like you fought a sandstorm and lost. Yasmin tried to steady her breathing. The memory surged anyway, lantern-light silk gowns, nobles parting like a tide as she stumbled into the ballroom. Their laughter rising and rising. The Sultan's eyes on her like a blade. His voice echoing across marble floors. If you can fit into the late Queen's guntiino, you will be Sultana. The laughter had swallowed her whole. Her chest tightened until she could barely speak. I shouldn't have gone there, she whispered. I never belonged. That isn't true. This world doesn't want me, Yasmin said, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. Today proved it. Ifrax moved closer, stepping over fallen threads. Tell me what happened. Yasmin shook her head. She didn't want to relive it. Didn't want to say the words aloud, because speaking them would make them more real. But the truth was written all over her face, and Ifrax waited with a patience she rarely showed anyone else. So Yasmin told her. In pieces at first, her arrival, the side hallway, the nobles rushing past. Then everything spilled out in a torrent she couldn't stop. When she reached the moment of the Sultan's cruel decree, her voice cracked. Shame burned her from the inside out. Ifrax didn't interrupt, didn't speak. She just listened, jaw tightening, until Yasmin saw muscles jump beneath her cheek. When Yasmin finished, she felt drained hollow. Silence filled the workshop, heavy as stone. That bastard Ifrax whispered. Yasmin laughed bitterly. He's the Sultan. If he were wise, Ifrax replied, he would be ashamed. Yasmin turned away her gaze, landing on the unfinished cloth she had pushed from the table hours earlier. It was crushed beneath her stool threads, pulled loose like torn veins. She crouched and gathered it gently, smoothing the fabric, despite the tears still stinging her eyes. I worked so hard, she murmured. I thought, maybe this would mean something. Maybe someone in that palace would see what I could do. They saw nothing, Ifrax said, kneeling beside her. Not because you lack worth, but because they lack sight. Yasmin's throat tightened again. I don't know how to stand up after something like this. Then don't stand yet, Ifrax said simply. Rest first. Breathe. I'll help clean this place, and tomorrow you'll decide what comes next. Yasmin nodded faintly, but dread pressed against her ribs. Tomorrow. Tomorrow meant she would have to face the market again. The whispers, the stares, the children repeating the cruel joke like it was a song. She wasn't sure she had the strength. Ifrax squeezed her shoulder. I'm not leaving you alone. Not tonight. They cleaned together in weary silence, thread by thread, fabric by fabric. When the floor was cleared and the lamps had burned low, Ifrax finally stood. I'll bring breakfast at dawn, she said softly. Yasmin forced a small, grateful smile. When the door closed behind her, friend Yasmin stood alone in the quiet workshop. She sank onto her stool, staring at the loom she had always trusted with her heart. Tonight her hands refused to reach for it. Her gaze drifted to the guntino by the hearth, the dress she had almost burned, and something inside her twisted. Not anger, not courage, not yet. Just a question she could not silence. What would she do now? Outside, a cold wind swept over Jirbal, rattling the shutters as if urging her to move, to breathe, to rise. She didn't know how, but morning would come, and with it something she could not yet see. Some halls are built not to honor beauty, but to crush those who dare carry their own. The morning after her world cracked open, Yasmin walked the winding road toward Harumad Palace, with the ceremonial cloth balanced across her back. The woven bundle felt heavier than it had the night before when fear and humiliation had driven her into chaos. Now it pulled at her like a burden she couldn't shake. Ifrax had forced her to eat a few bites of flatbread before leaving, watching her with protective anger. Deliver the cloth, she'd said firmly. Do the work you promised. Don't let a palace full of hollow hearts stop you. But doing the work didn't mean Yasmin felt whole. Each step up the hill stretched the rawness inside her chest. Villagers glanced her way, whispers trailing behind her like sand in the wind. She kept moving. The palace came into view slowly, white stone walls rising above terraced gardens, banners rippling in the highland breeze. Minarets cast long shadows across the steps, where guards in embroidered sashes stood watch. Yasmin kept her eyes lowered as she approached the servant entrance, forcing her breathing to steady. A palace steward inspected the cloth, nodded with brisk approval, and gestured down a corridor. Deliver it inside the lower hall, he instructed. The moonlit maska begins at sundown. They are preparing. Yasmin followed the narrow passageway, her heart knocking against her ribs. She'd never been inside the palace before. The air smelled of sandalwood and incense. Light from cut glass lanterns danced across the floor, making the stone shimmer beneath her feet. She passed servants carrying trays of jeweled fruits, dancers adjusting their veils, and musicians tightening strings on their lyres. No one paid attention to her. She was invisible here. The lower hall opened into a wide, bright space where artisans were arranging decorations. Yasmin delivered this cloth to a coordinator, stepped back, and exhaled shakily. Her task was done. She could leave. But as she turned to go, music swelled through the air, soft echoing notes drifting from the upper floors. Without meaning to, she followed the sound. Curiosity tugged at her. She had grown up hearing stories about the moonlit maska, the night when the palace glowed brighter than the stars, when nobles paraded beauty like armor. She had never imagined being anywhere near it. A half-open archway revealed a staircase leading upward. She told herself she would only look from a distance, only a moment. Her feet moved anyway. Voices grew louder as she climbed. Laughter chimed like bells. Perfume drifted down in waves. She approached the last step and paused, glancing into the soaring ballroom. The sight stole her breath. High stained glass windows poured color over polished black stone. Golden lanterns hung from carved beams. Musicians tuned their instruments on a raised platform. Nobles practiced slow, elegant steps, their garments shimmering with threads of silver, amethyst, and emerald. No tale told in Jirbal had prepared her for this. She remained in the shadows, afraid to cross the threshold. Then someone shouted, "Move!" A group of nobles swept into the corridor behind her, laughing among themselves, not looking where they walked. One shoulder clipped hers. The impact knocked her forward. She stumbled through the archway. Her foot caught on the edge of the stone. The world tilted. She tried to steady herself, but the ceremonial cloth she carried slipped from her grasp. The bundle unrolled across the marble floor with a soft hiss, spreading fine cotton and intricate weaves in a delicate arc. Conversation stopped. Music faltered. A wave of curious silence rippled outward as faces turned toward her painted, jeweled immaculate. Heat scorched Yasmin's cheeks. She knelt, reaching desperately for the cloth, trying to gather it before anyone could look too closely. Her hands shook. "What is this?" someone scoffed from above her. "A common weaver crawling across our floor." The voice belonged to Lady Zahra Kulan. Yasmin recognized her instantly, tall, impossibly slender, draped in thin layers of midnight silk that moved like living shadows. A smile curved Zahra's lips, sweet as poisoned honey. "Oh, how bold," she said loudly, ensuring every noble heard. "Some people cannot tell the difference between a palace and a market stall." Laughter scattered like broken glass. Yasmin pressed the cloth against her chest, eyes stinging. Across the ballroom, the Sultan rose from his carved wooden throne. Raj Darman moved with the slow confidence of a man accustomed to attention, the golden eagle crest on his attire glinting beneath lantern light. He approached her with a gaze as unreadable as desert moonlight. "Stand," he commanded. Yasmin forced herself upright, though her knees trembled. His eyes swept over her, her strong arms, her thick braids, the curve of her waist beneath her simple guntiino. No warmth flickered in his expression, only calculation, only the thrill of amusement. He lifted one hand and the ballroom hushed completely. "If she believes herself worthy of entering this hall," he said, voice carrying, "she may prove it." His eyes narrowed, and Yasmin felt the world shrink around her. "If you can fit into the late queen's guntiino," he said, each word sharp as flint, "then I will make you sultana." Gasps broke the silence, and then, like a tidal wave, laughter, rolling cruel, victorious. The nobles roared with delight, delighted in the humiliation. Some clapped. Some pointed at her as tears gathered in her eyes. Her heart thrashed like a trapped bird. She held the cloth tighter, trying to breathe, trying to understand how the world could tilt so suddenly beneath her feet. Then she turned and ran. The laughter followed her down the corridor, echoing off stone walls, chasing her long after she burst out into the cool night and fled down the palace steps toward Jirbale. And the sound did not stop echoing in her mind, not even when she reached her door and shut herself inside. Shame travels faster than wind across desert plains. By dawn, the story had already outrun her. Yasmin felt it the moment she stepped outside her workshop to fetch water. The air in Girbale had always carried the crisp scent of the highlands bright with eucalyptus and roasting grain. This morning it carried something else, whispers. She didn't need to hear the words to know they were about her. Eyes slid toward her from behind woven fences. Women paused mid-sweep on their stoops. Children watched with the brutal honesty of youth, their expressions puzzled, curious, entertained. She lowered her gaze and walked quickly, every heartbeat a drum of humiliation. Her legs felt heavy as if each step dragged the memory of the ballroom behind her. At the well, 3 market women fell silent when she approached. They moved aside, but not with the familiar warmth they once showed her. One of them murmured under her breath, too low to be clear, but loud enough to sting. Yasmin tied the rope around the bucket and dropped it, watching ripples distort her reflection. When she pulled it back up, her hands trembled so hard she nearly spilled the water. "It's only a story," she whispered to herself. "Stories fade, but this one had claws." By midday, the whispers had grown louder. Word spread through spice vendors, cloth merchants, camel herders returning from the lowlands, every version worse than the last. Some claimed she had stormed into the ballroom demanding to be queen. Others said she'd thrown herself at the Sultan's feet. Children reenacted the moment, tugging at oversized shawls and waddling dramatically as they mocked the challenge. Ifraax burst into her workshop with fury blazing in her eyes. "They're fools," she snapped. "Every one of them. You did nothing wrong." Yasmin didn't respond. She sat hunched over her loom, though her hands refused to work. Thread dangled from her fingers. Every time she tried to tie a knot, her mind snapped back to the ballroom. The silence, the cruel decree, the laughter that broke over her like a storm. They've even twisted the Sultan's words. Ifraax continued pacing in tight circles. Someone said, "He told you to crawl across the floor." Another said, "You begged to prove your beauty." She stopped pacing and crouched beside Yasmin. "Tell me what you need. Say it. I will do anything." Yasmin stared at the pattern she had woven the day before. She had been proud of it. Now her vision blurred, and she saw only the torn threads scattered around her workshop floor, the remnants of her panic the night she fled home. "I can't go to the market," she whispered. "You don't have to. I can't work. You don't have to do that today either." Yasmin swallowed hard, throat aching. "What happens when the weaving stops?" Ifraax hesitated. Her fierce confidence faltered for just a moment. "You rest," she said softly. "You heal. That's enough." Yasmin wanted to believe her, but her workshop, usually alive with color and motion, felt drained. The walls seemed to lean inward. Every tool felt too heavy. Even the loom, the one thing that had always steadied her, looked like a stranger. By late afternoon, her worst fear came to her door. A young boy, panting from the run uphill, handed her a folded letter. The wax seal belonged to the Harmadoon family, her most loyal patrons. Yasmin's stomach twisted even before she opened it. The note was short. "We will require no further work at this time. We wish you well." She read it twice, then again. Ifraax took the letter from her hands and tore it in half. "You don't need them," she spat, "and they will regret this." But Yasmin barely heard her. The world dimmed around her. Her clients were her livelihood, her mother's legacy. If they left, she pressed both palms against her forehead, fighting a rising wave of panic. The room wavered. The shadows grew long and sharp. Ifraax grabbed her shoulders. "Breathe, Yasmin. Look at me." "I worked for years," Yasmin whispered, voice cracking. "I earned their trust. All gone. In one night. Not just trust. Dignity." belonging. The sense that she had a place in Jirbali that no one could take. Night came early, settling over the workshop like a heavy shroud. Lamps flickered weakly against the growing darkness. Yasmin sat in silence, staring at her loom as if waiting for her hands to remember their purpose. But they didn't. They hung limp at her sides. Hours passed. Ifrax eventually left to tend to her own stall, promising to return at dawn. Yasmin stayed where she was, long after the last lamp burned low. When she finally rose, her knees nearly buckled. She went to the mirror hanging on the wall, an heirloom from her mother. Its polished surface had always reflected her as she truly was, a woman who worked hard, who had strength in her hands and kindness in her face. Tonight, it reflected a stranger. Her eyes were swollen, her braid frayed, her cheeks blotched from tears. But worse than her appearance was the look she couldn't hide: fear. Shame. The echo of voices that had laughed as if she were less than human. She touched her reflection with trembling fingers. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. The room gave no answer. Her gaze drifted to the ceremonial guntiino she had thrown aside the night before. Its edges curled where the heat of the fire had kissed it. She crossed the room, picked it up, and held it against her chest. The fabric felt foreign, like a memory she didn't want. She sank to the floor. The guntiino pooled around her like spilled ink. Her breathing faltered. Tears blurred her vision until the lantern flame dissolved into trembling, golden halos. She stayed there until exhaustion claimed her. Outside, the streets of Jirbaal quieted, but the whispers did not fade. Not in the town, not in her heart. Somewhere far from her door, other eyes took notice of the spreading story, eyes that did not mock, but measured, weighed, and remembered, and their steps were already turning toward her. A master sees the truth in the stitches the world refuses to notice. Night pressed against the windows like a living thing, and Yasmin lay curled on her workshop floor, still in the clothes she had worn yesterday. Her eyes burned. Her skin felt tight from dried tears. She had not lit the lamps again after they died. She did not need light to see what her shame had done. The wreckage of her weaving tools, the half-burned guntiano, the tangled threads on the floor, every piece of the room seemed to echo the breaking inside her. Sometime after dusk, exhaustion dragged her into a shallow sleep. It did not last. A fist struck her door, 3 sharp knocks that jolted her upright. Her breath caught. Not again. She couldn't face anyone else tonight. Not the neighbors, not the gossiping merchants, not even Ifrax. She did not have the strength to pretend she was still whole. Another knock, firmer this time. Yasmin wiped her face with her sleeve and pushed herself to her feet. She crossed the room slowly, as though wading through water. Her hands shook as she reached for the latch. She cracked the door open. A tall man stood outside, backlit by the faint moonlight. His white beard glowed like frost, and his long shawl stirred in the highland wind. His eyes, dark, steady, unblinking, met hers with an intensity that made her spine straighten. Yasmin Warsame. His voice carried quiet authority. Not demanding, not cruel, simply sure. She nodded, unable to speak. "May I come in?" She hesitated. This man did not belong to Jirbaale. His clothes were far too fine, his bearing too confident. A noble, a merchant, no something else. Someone who moved between worlds. Still, she stepped aside. He entered without hurry, ducking his head beneath the low doorway. When she closed the door, her eyes adjusted to the dim, and she recognized him. Ustad Kalin Dir, the palace's master tailor, the man whose work was spoken of in reverent tones across 3 kingdoms, the man whose hands had sewn garments for queen sultans and diplomats. Yasmin's breath froze. Why would he be here? In her workshop in the middle of the night, Colin Deere surveyed the room slowly. His eyes moved across the torn threads, the scattered spools, the broken loom tools. Then he looked at the singed guntino near the hearth. He said nothing. The silence stretched until Yasmin forced out a hoarse whisper. If you came to scold me or confirm the stories, I've heard enough from the whole kingdom. He raised one eyebrow. Is that what you believe brought me here? I don't know why you would bother with someone like me, she muttered, crossing her arms in a poor attempt at defense. You're who you are. And who are you? He asked, stepping closer. Her voice thinned. A weaver. A foolish one. He reached down, picked up a fallen thread from the floor, and rolled it between his fingers. This knot, he said quietly, is one used only in advanced Harumad embroidery. Where did you learn it? My mother, Yasmin whispered. She learned it from her mother. A family of artisans, then. His tone softened. Strong lineage. She looked away. It doesn't matter. Not after everything matters, he interrupted. What happened to you was cruelty. A wound carved by arrogance. But wounds are not the end of a story unless you let them be. Her throat ached. Tears threatened again. I don't know how to start again. Everyone looks at me differently now. Colin Deere exhaled slowly, as if weighing his next words with great care. Then he walked toward the guntino she had nearly burned. He lifted it from the floor and ran a seasoned hand along the fabric. His fingers traced the weave with the attention of a man reading a story hidden inside threads. This is good work, he murmured. She blinked, startled. It's ruined. I almost burned it. But you didn't. He folded the cloth with surprising gentleness. You stopped yourself. Yasmin swallowed hard. Why are you here? He looked at her fully then. I came because I heard whispers of a young weaver in the highlands whose stitching is unlike anything in the royal ateliers. Precise, bold, emotional. Stitchwork that speaks. Her breath hitched. I came, he continued softly, because I believe Harumad needs artists who see beauty where others see weakness. She stared at him, numb with disbelief. I came for you, Yasmin Warsame. Not despite what happened, but because of it. Her voice was barely a sound. I don't understand. Colin Deere stepped closer, his presence steady as an anchor. If you allow me, I will train you. Personally. Quietly. We will work inside the palace atelier before sunrise. No nobles, no gossips, only the craft. Her heart stumbled in her chest. You would teach me, she whispered. Yes, but understand the truth. His gaze sharpened. What I offer is not comfort. It is work harder than anything you have known. It will strip you bare, then rebuild you one stitch at a time. It will demand discipline, patience, courage. And you will have to face the very place that tried to break you. Her fingers curled in on themselves. Why me? Because you are a rare thing, he said. A wounded spirit that still tries to create beauty, and because what they tried to take from you is exactly what makes you great. The words hit her with such force that her knees threatened to give. I can't, she shook her head, overwhelmed. I'm not sure I'm strong enough. He tilted his head slightly. Strength is not required to begin. Only willingness. Her breath quivered. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since the maska, she felt something other than pain. a faint, trembling ember of possibility. When she opened her eyes again, they shone with something fragile but real. "I want to learn," she whispered. Colin nodded once, not triumphant, simply satisfied. "Then we begin at dawn." He stepped toward the door, but paused with his hand on the latch. "Clean your workshop tonight," he said quietly. "Not because it is dirty, but because you are not done with it. Not yet." Then he left. Yasmin stood motionless, the silence of the room settling around her. Her heart felt bruised but fuller than it had in days. She looked at the scattered threads and kneeling began gathering them one by one. Not because she was whole, but because she had decided to rise. To rebuild a spirit, begin with a single steady stitch. Before dawn, the world still held its breath. The hills surrounding Jirba were wrapped in a pale blue haze, and the cold air carried the faint scent of wood smoke drifting from the earliest cooking fires. Yasmin walked the stone path toward Harumad Palace, with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, her pulse a small trembling drum beneath her ribs. She had not slept much. After Colin left her workshop, her hands had moved on their own sorting thread, sweeping the floor, repairing broken tools. She restored the room as if restoring herself piece by piece while Ifraax slept unaware a few streets away. Now, with the horizon still dark, Yasmin climbed the palace steps, each footfall echoing in the quiet. No nobles filled the courtyard, no music floated through the halls. This was a different world from the one that had humiliated her. A version of the palace few ever saw. Her breath fogged in the cold air as she approached the narrow service entrance Colin had described. She knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Colin stood on the other side, fully awake, wrapped in layers of cream and indigo. His presence filled the doorway, imposing yet calm like a mountain shadow cast by morning light. "You came," he said simply. Yasmin nodded, her throat tight. "I said I would." "Then follow me." He led her through winding corridors that smelled of cedar and old parchment. Lanterns mounted high on the walls flickered faint amber light. Servants moved quietly, carrying water jars or lighting incense, their eyes widening when they saw Yasmin. None of them spoke. At last, they reached a heavy wooden door carved with floral motifs and long lines that flowed like reeds bending in the wind. Colin pressed his palm against the center panel. The door swung open. Yasmin stepped into a room that stole her breath. The atelier was enormous, larger than any weaving space she had ever imagined. Rows of looms stood like wooden skeletons across the floor. Shelves rose to the ceiling, stacked with folded silks, embroidered shawls and cloths glimmering under lantern light. Tables held jars of powdered dyes in shades of fire red, indigo, desert pink, and deep saffron. Bundles of thread hung from beams overhead like strands of sunlight caught in place. She could only whisper, "It's beautiful." "It is a place of work," Colin replied. "Beauty is a consequence, not a goal." He walked deeper into the room, gesturing for her to follow. "This atelier has no room for ego. The cloth does not care for praise or pride. It demands precision, discipline, truth." She nodded, absorbing every word. Colin brought her to a loom at the far end of the room, simpler than the ornate ones the master artisans used, but finely built, polished by decades of use. "This will be yours," he said. The words settled over her like a blessing she did not know how to receive. He sat on a low stool beside her. "Before you touch it, sit." She obeyed. He handed her a basket of tangled thread colors knotted together in a chaotic mass. "Untangle these." She blinked. All of it, yes. But isn't this the work of a novice precisely, he said. And today you are a novice. Heat rose in her cheeks, but she bent her head to the task. The knots were tight, stubborn, interwoven. Her fingers shook, at first clumsy from lack of sleep and lingering shame. But the rhythm soon took over, loosening, separating, winding thread around her palm. Colin Deere watched her silently. Minutes stretched into an hour. The world narrowed to thread and breath, breath and thread. Her hands steadied, her shoulders lowered. Her mind so clouded with self-doubt for days slowly cleared. When the last knot gave way beneath her fingers, she exhaled a shaky breath. Colin Deere nodded. Pain tangles the spirit much like that. Only patience can undo it. She looked up, startled at the truth in his voice. Your stitching will follow the state of your heart, he continued. If the heart is frantic, the thread twists. If it is fearful, the hands tighten. If it is determined, the fabric sings. Yasmin swallowed. The words sank deep. Stand, he said gently. They moved to the loom. He demonstrated how to seat herself in front of it, back straight, shoulders loose, breathing even. Then he guided her in checking the warp tension, adjusting the heddles, positioning the reed. His hands moved with the certainty of decades, but he never overshadowed her movements. He showed. She followed. Slowly, carefully, she learned. When she slipped, he corrected without judgment. When she hesitated, he waited. When she wove her first narrow line of cloth, uneven but real, something warm sparked in her chest. You see, he murmured, your hands still remember. She felt the sting of tears, but blinked them back. I thought I'd lost everything. You lost what was never worth keeping, he said. Their mockery was darkness. You were meant for light. The words were a balm she didn't know she had needed. Hours passed unnoticed. As dawn broke outside and sunlight filtered through the atelier windows, Yasmin found herself lost in the slow, steady rhythm of weaving each beat of the shuttle, a reminder that she was still here, still capable, still worthy of creation. By the time Colin Deere called for a break, her arms ached pleasantly. She flexed her fingers and studied the pale strip of cloth she had produced. Simple, imperfect, but undeniably hers. You have done well, he said. Yasmin looked up at him. Thank you. Truly. He gave a rare, fleeting smile. Return tomorrow before sunrise. We have much to build. As Yasmin stepped out of the atelier, exhausted but steady, she didn't notice the tall figure standing in the shadowed hallway. Captain Kahaye, arms folded, watched her with quiet interest, recognition in his eyes, and something more. True beauty blooms when no one is watching. The mornings in the palace atelier became Yasmin's anchor. Each day before sunrise, she slipped through the narrow service door, heart steadying, the moment she stepped into the cavernous room full of looms, cloth, and hushed reverence. Here, beneath curved ceilings and lanterns burning low, there were no nobles to mock her, no whispers of the maska to tighten her throat. Only thread, only work, only purpose. Colin Deere drove her hard. His lessons were quiet, but relentless. He taught her to blend dyes from crushed saffron and indigo petals to balance geometric motifs without letting the eye drift, to adjust warp tension by sound alone. Hours passed in a blur of concentration. Her fingers hardened again. Her breathing found a rhythm that matched the pull of the thread. And slowly, Yasmin rediscovered the joy of creation, not for praise, not for a customer's approval, but for the calming hum that settled her soul when cloth grew beneath her hands. One morning, as the first hints of dawn painted soft gold over the floor, she finished a section of fabric that made Colin Deere pause mid-step. The cloth shimmered faintly with blended dyes, the pattern flowing in curves that honored roundness and strength instead of narrowing the body. It was unlike anything the palace had ever produced, bolder, freer shaped by a heart that had known shame and was choosing something brighter. "It speaks," Kalindire murmured. Yasmin flushed, unsure how to respond. "I only followed the lines you taught me." "No," he said firmly. "You followed the truth inside you." She didn't know how to hold that praise. It felt too large for her hands. When she left the atelier that morning, slipping back into the palace corridor, she nearly collided with Captain Kahi. He had been there more often lately, though she didn't know why. He stepped back quickly, his posture straight, but his expression momentarily softening. "You rise before half the guards," he said. "I am learning," she replied quietly. His gaze flicked to her satchel of fabric samples, then back to her. Respect, not pity, not scorn, rested in his eyes. "The palace whispers many things," he said, "but I hear nothing of you except the footsteps at dawn." Yasmin wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a warning. Before she could reply, he gave a short, respectful nod and continued down the corridor. That small moment lingered with her as she walked back to Jirbal. When she reached the marketplace, the sun had risen fully. Stalls opened one by one, the air filling with the scent of roasted grains and incense. Yasmin kept her shawl low over her face, hoping to avoid attention. But the marketplace always had eyes. Ifraax spotted her first, abandoning her spice stall without hesitation. "You look tired," she said immediately, then narrowed her eyes. "And you're hiding something behind that tiredness." Yasmin tried to smile. "I've just been working." "Working," Ifraax snorted. "In the palace, don't try to lie to me. You've been disappearing before dawn and returning after mid-morning." "You think I don't notice?" Yasmin looked down, guilt twisting in her stomach. "I didn't want to drag you into anything risky." Ifraax grabbed her arm. "You are my friend. Where you walk, I walk, even into danger." Warmth spread through Yasmin's chest. "It's not danger. It's learning. Kalindira is teaching me." Ifrax's mouth fell open. The master tailor. The one nobles worship like a saint carved from fabric. Her eyes widened further. "And you're worried about dragging me into anything, girl. I would drag myself to witness this." Yasmin laughed, a small, startled sound that felt unfamiliar after so many days of heaviness. "It isn't glamorous," she said. "It's work, hard work." "I know you," Ifrax replied. "You've always thrived in hard work." The words warmed her, but the marketplace had changed. While some women nodded politely, most people still watched Yasmin with wary eyes. The Maska's story hadn't faded. She could feel it in the stiffness of strangers' shoulders, in the whispers that stilled when she passed. Yet something else was happening too. Two older women approached her stall that afternoon. Their clothes were decorated with familiar motifs, curves, blossoms, patterns Yasmin had quietly taught a few seamstresses during the weeks she was rebuilding herself. One woman touched her shawl nervously. "We heard you know a better way to stitch this design," she said. "One that doesn't squeeze us like fish wrapped for smoking." Yasmin blinked. "You want me to teach you?" The second woman nodded. "We want something made for women like us, not for those who starve to look fashionable." It felt like the ground shifted beneath Yasmin's feet. She invited them into her workshop. Hours passed in laughter and shared stories. Their excitement reminded her why she had ever touched a loom in the first place. Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, women from all corners of Jirbale gathered near Yasmin's workshop, seeking designs that honored their bodies instead of punishing them. She taught quietly, discreetly, offering patterns she had sketched in the palace atelier, modest, intricate, revolutionary. When she returned to Colleen Deer the following morning, he noticed the faint ink marks on her fingers. "You've been teaching," he said. She stiffened. "Should I not? It is good," he replied. "The work is meant to reach people. Cloth is the simplest way to reshape a kingdom." Yasmin paused at that. "Reshape, I'm just—" "No," he said, stopping her. "You are doing something few dare. You're giving women a different mirror, one that reflects them as they are." Her heart throbbed with unfamiliar pride. She returned to her loom with renewed purpose, the shuttle gliding under her hands like a promise. Behind her, Colin Deer watched silently, understanding what she did not yet see, the change beginning to ripple through Harumad. Later, as she left the palace with the rising sun, she felt the faint shift of something stirring in the depths of the kingdom. Something restless, something inevitable. And at the very center of it, unknowingly, stood her. To be worthy is not to be chosen. It is to rise when no one asks you to. The morning Colin Deer handed Yasmin the sealed parchment, her hands went cold before she even opened it. She recognized the mark on the wax before he spoke. The twin silver threads crossed like blades. The emblem of the Guild of Master Artisans. A symbol she had only whispered about in her childhood, tracing imaginary versions of it in the dust while dreaming impossible dreams. "You have been nominated," Colin Deer said. The words seemed too heavy for her chest. "Nominated? For what?" "For the silver weft." His gaze was calm, but she sensed quiet pride beneath it. "Your work has been submitted to the guild. They will judge it in 3 days." Her breath caught. You didn't tell me you were sending it." "If I had, you would have doubted yourself," he replied simply. "And doubt steals more from artisans than failure ever could." She looked down at the parchment again. Her heart thudded painfully. The silver weft emblem was the highest honor in Harumad's textile tradition. Only those who reshaped the craft received it. Those whose work was whispered about across kingdoms. Those whose hands made history. "I'm not," she began. "You are," he interrupted. "Now go. Prepare. Prepare." As if any preparation could steady the storm rising inside her. She left the atelier, trembling, her mind spinning. By the time she reached Jirbali, her workshop felt smaller than ever, too small to hold the magnitude of what she faced. Ifrayax practically sprinted to her when she saw Yasmin's stunned expression. What happened? Did the palace collapse? Did the Sultan step on a needle? Yasmin handed her the parchment. Ifrayax tore it open and scanned it quickly. Her gasp echoed through the street. "The silver weft, Yasmin. This is," she grabbed her shoulders and shook her lightly. "You are going to make every woman in this kingdom scream with pride." Yasmin laughed weakly, the sound barely holding together. "I don't even know where to begin." "Begin with tea," Ifrax declared. "Revolutions require hydration." But tea was not enough. Not for this. When night fell, Yasmin lit every lamp in her workshop and pulled the guntiino, the same one she had worn to the maska, onto her table. The fabric still carried faint burn marks along the hem where she had almost fed it to the fire. The memory of that night, the laughter, the humiliation threatened to choke her. But this time she did not look away. Her fingers touched the ruined cloth gently. "You and I," she whispered, "will not end in ash." She gathered her scissors, thread, dye pots, and needles. Then she began the slow, painful process of unweaving the garment. Every tug felt like pulling a thorn from her own skin. Every loosened thread carried a memory she had tried to bury. Her tears fell silently, but her hands did not stop. She worked until her back throbbed and her fingers numbed. The guntiino dissolved into a pile of loose thread and fragments stripped of its form, but ready to become something new. Days blurred into nights. She slept little, ate less, and poured everything she remembered, everything she feared, everything she had survived into the garment she rebuilt. The new design took shape slowly, curves of blooming desert jasmine, rising from a pattern of broken lines that rejoined into flowing continuous weaves. The geometric motifs honored the Harari highlands, while threads of silver and midnight blue intertwined to mimic star paths across the desert sky. With every stitch, she reclaimed something the ballroom had tried to steal. On the final night before the evaluation, Yasmin stepped back from the dress. It shimmered softly in the lamplight, as if holding a breath of its own. It was beautiful. Not delicate beautiful. Not court beautiful. Alive beautiful. A garment born of pain, but rebuilt with purpose. When she carried it to the artisan's hall at dawn, the streets of Djirbal watched her in awe. Many recognized her now, not as the woman mocked in the palace, but as the one helping them reclaim pride in their own bodies and stories. The hall was packed when she arrived. Master artisans whispered as she passed. Some regarded her with curiosity, others with skepticism. Few could hide their surprise at seeing Kalindira enter beside her. Guild leaders inspected her dress. They lifted seams, examined stitches under lantern light, tested the strength of her threads, and marveled at her dye blending. But it was the story encoded in the cloth, the transformation, the courage, the reclamation, that held their eyes the longest. When the head of the guild stepped forward, his voice rang through the hall. Yasmin Warsame of Djirbale, your work is not just art. It is awakening. He raised the silver emblem, a small metal medallion shaped like two interwoven threads. With unanimous decision, we award you the silver weft. Gasps rippled across the hall. Applause rose hesitant at first, then swelling like a tide. Yasmin's vision blurred as the emblem was placed into her palm. Her fingers curled around it tightly. She felt Ephrax's proud sob from somewhere behind her. She saw Kalindir bow his head in quiet approval. She stood tall, shoulders square, heart steady. When she stepped outside the hall, women from the lower districts greeted her with cheers and ululations. Some carried shawls bearing her patterns. Others lifted their children so they could see her. Every face shone with hope. Yasmin inhaled deeply, the cool morning air filling her lungs like the beginning of a new life. But when she glanced toward the palace walls in the distance, she did not know that news of the ceremony was already being carried inside toward the very man who had once made her the center of a cruel joke. Nor could she sense the shift in the palace's heartbeat as her name reached ears that had once listened only for their own praise. She only knew this. She had risen not because anyone allowed her to, but because she had refused to stay broken. Some truths strike harder than spears. The courtyards of Haramad Palace buzzed with the usual morning rhythm, servants sweeping stone paths, guards rotating their posts, scribes carrying scrolls to and from the council chambers. The sound blended into a familiar hum beneath the rising sun. Sultan Rajdarman sat in his reception hall, half listening as his steward recited the day's list of guild announcements. He wasn't interested. Guild business was tedious at best, irrelevant at worst, but protocol demanded he endure it. The Potters' Guild requests lower tax on imported clay. Rage stifled a yawn. The leather workers seek permission to expand their tannery. He drummed his fingers on the arm of his seat. And lastly, the Guild of Master Artisans announces this season's recipient of the silver weft emblem. He almost waved the steward on, uninterested, in a name that would mean nothing to him. But the man continued dutifully. Awarded to Yasmin Warsame of Jirbali, the Sultan froze. The words drifted toward him like dust motes suspended in sunlight. For a heartbeat, he wondered if he'd misheard. But the steward repeated the name, clearing his throat to continue with the next item. Rage lifted a hand sharply. Repeat it. The steward blinked. Yasmin Warsame, Your Majesty. The name rippled through him like a dropped stone in still water. Yasmin. The weaver from the Maska. The woman who had fallen into the ballroom, who had been mocked, who had become the butt of an entire night's entertainment. The woman he had humiliated. Rage hadn't thought of her since. Not with any weight, at least. He remembered only the flicker of amusement the crowd craved, the cruel joke he offered them, the twisted pleasure of lifting a room with a single line. If you can fit into the late Queen's Guntino, I will make you Sultana. He had meant nothing by it. It was performance, ceremony, a moment's sport. But the name had returned to him now with a sharpness he hadn't expected. A thread pulled too hard, unraveling something deep inside. How did she earn it? Rage asked before thinking. The steward blinked again. Her garment was said to be extraordinary, sire. The guild leaders praised its artistry. They spoke of its emotional depth. Emotional depth. From the woman he'd brushed aside like dust. Lady Zara Kulain swept into the hall, then late as always wrapped in obsidian silk. Your Majesty, she said lightly, dipping her head. I heard the guild has awarded some unknown artisan from the Highlands. Do you know her? Shaj asked abruptly. Zara's brows rose. Know her hardly. She's the same woman who made that little spectacle at the Maska. A clumsy weaver with no sense of her place. A cruel smile curved her lips. Imagine giving such a person an award meant for masters. The words struck him harder than intended. Zara continued oblivious. She embarrassed herself. And us. I'm surprised you even remember her. Rage didn't respond. He couldn't. A strange tightness wrapped around his chest. Remember her. He remembered the laughter, the humiliation, the way she held the cloth against her as if shielding herself from arrows. He also remembered her face, not its shape or its details, but its collapse. Later that afternoon, unable to silence the restless churn inside him, Rage left the palace. He told no one where he was going. The path to the Master's Fair wound through the artisan district, bustling with life. Merchants shouted over one another, selling hand-carved bowls and leather sandals. Music drifted from a cluster of street performers. He walked with his hood drawn low, ignoring the curious glances. When he reached the fair, it was already crowded. Stalls lined the courtyard, each bursting with colors, dyes, shawls, rugs, carved figurines. He moved through the rows, polite nods concealing the unease twisting inside him. Then he saw it. A booth draped in night-colored fabric, and at its center, displayed on a raised wooden form, was the dress. Not a dress, a transformation, silver lines curved like flowing water beneath moonlight. Midnight blue blossomed into desert jasmine. The pattern carried echoes of brokenness reforged into strength, beauty that came from surviving fire, not avoiding it. Rage felt the air leave his lungs. This piece, he murmured. Who made it? A woman beside him answered softly, Yasmin Warsame. As if summoned by her own creation, Yasmin stepped from behind the booth. She wore a shawl patterned with the same curves and silver threads, her posture straighter than he remembered her presence, steady like someone who had learned how to breathe again. Her eyes met his. Shock flickered through her features, quick, controlled, but she did not flinch. She did not bow. She did not avert her gaze. She stood rooted in her own worth, the kind that could not be stripped by laughter or cruelty. Rage felt his stomach hollow. He had done this. He had helped carve the pain that shaped her. Guilt, raw and unfamiliar, pressed against his ribs until he could hardly breathe. He reached for something to say, but nothing came. What words could fill the distance between who he had been then and who stood before him now? Yasmin's voice broke the silence. Your Majesty, not warm, not cold, simply acknowledgement. He opened his mouth, but she shifted her gaze to the next visitor approaching her stall. Elegantly, purposefully, as if he were the least important person in her afternoon. The dismissal landed like a blade between his ribs. He stepped back unsteady, his pulse hammering in his throat. The fair's noise crowded in around him, but all he heard was the echo of his own cruelty now ringing back at him with unflinching clarity. He left the fair without another word, Zara's disdain forgotten. The world around him blurred by something he had not felt in a long time. Shame. And in that shame, the first tremor of something else, a shift, a reckoning he could no longer outrun. Power fears what it cannot control. Rumors traveled through Haramad Palace like restless birds fluttering from hall to hall, gathering sharp edges along the way. Yasmin Warsam's silver-weft victory had reached every servant, every guard, every courtier, with ears eager for new gossip. Her name had become a pulse thrumming beneath the marble floors. Some spoke it with admiration, some with curiosity, and some with irritation. Lady Zara Kulain belonged firmly to the last group. She stood at her balcony overlooking the palace gardens, her fingers curled around the stone railing, with enough force to whiten her knuckles. Below her, officials moved like ants between meeting chambers. Yet all Zara saw was the threat rising from outside these walls, shaped not from noble bloodlines, but from thread. She embarrasses the palace with her mere existence, Zara muttered. Her attendant shifted nervously beside her. My lady, she is simply an artisan. She is a symbol, Zara snapped. And symbols shift kingdoms. She had worked too long, maneuvered too carefully, fought through too many closed doors to let some humble weaver become a whisper on the Sultan's lips. Especially now when rage had been distant, distracted, pacing more than ruling. Zara had noticed the change immediately. The Sultan had retreated into himself these past days, a storm cloud coiled inside his ribs, and she knew exactly why. She had seen the tremor in his voice when Yasmin's name had been spoken in the council hall. She had seen the way his jaw clenched when he thought no one watched. Zara was no fool. She knew when a man was haunted, and she intended to suffocate that ghost before it grew into something dangerous. She dismissed her attendant with a flick of her wrist and made her way to the administrative wing, where trade routes and merchant tariffs were negotiated. A silver-tongued caravan official greeted her with a too eager smile. My lady, how may I assist you today? Zara lowered her voice to a whisper dipped in honey. Tell me, what would happen if the mountain roads between Djerbale and the capital were temporarily rerouted? Strictly for safety. Inspections, of course, the man frowned. Rerouted. That would affect the flow of goods for weeks. Yes, she said softly, and the work of a certain artisan would reach the capital, somewhat slower. Understanding dawned in his eyes, troubled but tempting. Zara pressed a pouch of gold into his hands. Do your duty to the palace, she said. The Sultan should not be troubled with small matters of textile traffic. As she swept out of the room, her smile sharpened. Yasmin would feel the consequences soon enough. Meanwhile, far from palace schemes, Yasmin's workshop overflowed with quiet joy. Women from every corner of Djerbale gathered at her door. They wore her patterns, curved lines, bold shapes, flowers unfurling along hems, fabrics that embraced them instead of diminishing them. One by one, they stepped into her little room, carrying hope, excitement, and stories. A widow who wanted a dress that reminded her of the strength she still carried. A young mother who wanted something beautiful that wouldn't tear during chores. A merchant's wife who said her husband had stared at her the entire morning, not because she was thinner, but because she looked like herself. Yasmin listened to each of them. She stitched, taught, guided. Her workshop smelled of dye and warm bread, and women reclaiming something long shipped away by cruel expectations. By midday, Ifrax arrived with fresh spices and a grin that stretched too wide. "They're talking about you at the river," she announced. "Old Fadumo told me her daughter finally sees herself as beautiful. She said your cloth is like holding courage." Yasmin paused mid-stitch, her eyes softening. "I only give them patterns. They create the courage themselves." "Don't humble yourself to dust," Ifrax said, crossing her arms. "Your patterns are changing people." Yasmin smiled, but a shadow flickered beneath it. "Sometimes I still hear the laughter." Ifrax's expression softened. She touched Yasmin's arm. "Then let their voices be drowned by ours." Before Yasmin could reply, a knock sounded at the doorframe. Captain Kahi stood there tall and silent, his presence filling the small workshop. The women fell quiet for a moment, unsure of what his visit meant. He inclined his head politely. "May I speak with you?" Yasmin led him outside, heart steady but curious. Kahia's voice was low and tense. "There are changes in the palace. Suspicious changes. Trade routes are being redirected. It affects your district." Her brows knitted. He looked away, jaw tight. "Because someone wishes to slow your influence," Lady Zara Yasmin murmured. Kahia didn't confirm it aloud, but the silence answered for him. He stepped closer, voice steady. "You should be cautious. Some in the palace fear what you represent." Yasmin exhaled slowly, letting the truth settle over her. Fear was a powerful thing. It rattled halls, twisted hearts, made influential people act foolishly. She had felt it herself. "Thank you," she said quietly. Keahai studied her a moment longer, respect in his gaze and perhaps something deeper. "Your work matters to people," he said, "more than those in high rooms would ever admit." She felt warmth rise in her chest. "I will not stop. I didn't think you would." He gave a final nod and walked away, his figure disappearing into the dusty afternoon. Yasmin watched him go, aware that the world around her was shifting again, subtly, dangerously, inevitably. Forces she could not see were moving. Some sought to lift her, others sought to bury her. But her hands were steady. Her purpose had roots now deep and unshakable. Inside her workshop, the women's laughter rose again, bright and full. Yasmin stepped back through the doorway, into the warmth of the room she had rebuilt, not just for herself, but for anyone who needed it. She sat at her loom and began to weave. Healing begins where pride ends. The morning air carried a hush over Jirbale, a stillness so unusual it woke Yasmin before the first call to prayer. She rose from her sleeping mat, heart quietly unsettled, as if some unseen shift had cracked the horizon open. When she stepped outside, she found Captain Kahi waiting near her workshop door, his expression unreadable beneath the soft shimmer of dawn. He bowed his head. "Yasmin, the Sultan requests your presence." Her breath stilled. Not a summons, not an order delivered by a uniformed escort. A request. Polite, without force. Fear flickered at the edges of her thoughts. but it wasn't the same fear she once carried. This one had a different weight, more like anticipation, less like dread. When she asked, "Now," Kahia said gently, "he wishes to see you privately." Ifraax emerged from her house across the street, hair wrapped messily in a mourning scarf. She took one look at Kahia, then at Yasmin, and threw her hands up. "Absolutely not. If he wants to talk, he can write a letter, or send a pigeon, or grow a conscience and come here." Kahia tried not to smile. "It is safe. I give you my word." Ifraax huffed loudly, but stepped closer to Yasmin, lowering her voice. "Go if you must, but keep your head high. You owe that man nothing." Yasmin squeezed her friend's hand before turning to Kahia. "Take me." The walk to the palace felt different this time. Not like the long climb of shame she once endured, but like retracing steps she had already conquered. The gates opened without hesitation. Guards bowed. Servants parted respectfully. And Kahia led her through a quiet wing she had never seen before. He stopped before a carved wooden door. "He is alone," he said. "I will wait out here." Yasmin steadied her breath, then pushed the door open. Raj Darman stood near the large window, hands clasped behind his back. Sunlight cut across the floor, illuminating dust motes drifting in slow, lazy arcs. He looked different than she remembered, tired perhaps, or unarmored in a way she had never seen. Without the throne, without the audience, the grandeur that usually clung to him seemed softer, stripped down to something human. He turned as the door shut quietly behind her. "Yasmin Warsame," he said, voice low. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." She remained near the doorway, spine straight, chin raised. "You asked. Politely. I listened." He flinched almost imperceptibly at her tone. As he should. Silence stretched steady and taut. Finally, Rage exhaled as though releasing something he had held too long. "I owe you an apology." Yasmin's heartbeat throbbed in her ears, but she kept her face still. "I wronged you," he continued. "Not only in action, but in failing to see the cruelty I fed the room I allowed to devour you for sport. That night, I became the kind of ruler I despise. One who wounds because it is easy. One who forgets that power is not a shield for arrogance." His eyes lifted to hers, dark, steady, and full of something raw. "Regret. True regret. You did not deserve what I said, or what followed." His jaw tightened. "And nothing I offer can erase that. But I must speak these words with my whole heart. I am sorry." Yasmin felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness. Not yet, but the loosening of a knot she'd carried too long. She stepped farther into the room, the soft fabric of her shawl brushing her arms. For the first time, she looked at him without fear. "I broke that night," she said quietly. "But I rebuilt myself. Not for the palace, not for any throne. For me. For the women who needed someone to stitch their strength into cloth." She met his gaze. "Your apology matters, but it does not define me. My work does." Rage bowed his head. "As it should." She studied him a moment longer. The man before her was not the one who had mocked her. Or perhaps he was, but stripped of the armor that once disguised his flaws. Either way, she felt no hatred in her. Only clarity. "I accept your apology," she said. "But not for you. For my own peace." Rage closed his eyes briefly, relief flickering across his features. "Thank you." He stepped back, allowing the moment to settle gently between them. If ever you wish to present your designs in the palace hall, the door will be open to you, not as entertainment. His voice softened. As honor. Yasmin shook her head. The doors I need are already open. A small smile tugged at Rage's mouth, not wounded but understanding. Then I will not stand in your way. She inclined her head, a gesture not of submission but of closure. When she left the room, Kahai straightened immediately. He studied her face, searching for any sign of harm. I'm fine, Yasmin assured him. It's done. His shoulders eased. Then he smiled, warm, proud. Good. They walked out of the palace side by side through golden morning light that seemed to welcome her home. Jirbal greeted her with open arms. Ifrax ran to her the moment she appeared at the top of the hill. Well, did he finally learn manners? Yasmin laughed, the sound light unburdened. Something like that. The day passed in a bright rush. Women came with cloth to dye, girls arrived hoping to learn patterns, and traders offered fabrics from distant caravans. By afternoon, Yasmin found herself standing before the new building she had been preparing for weeks, a wide, sunlit room with freshly swept floors and shelves waiting for woven samples. The Harumad Textile Academy. Kalindir arrived near dusk, walking slowly but proudly. It is a good place, he said. It will hold good people, Yasmin replied. Ifrax stood beside her, arms crossed, grinning fiercely. And it will terrify every narrow-minded woman in the capital. Yasmin smiled. That is only a bonus. As lanterns were lit and women gathered inside, Yasmin stepped to her loom, new, sturdy, waiting. Her hands touched the smooth wood with reverence. Her life was no longer defined by a cruel moment in a marble hall. Her story was stitched into every thread she wove, now strong, resilient, unbroken. She pulled the first thread across the loom and began the future with her own hands.